NTSB has concluded the investigation into a Tesla crash that happened a couple of years ago, and now it looks like they're still blaming the Tesla Autopilot and a few other people and entities. You will not believe who they're not blaming, and we'll talk about it in a second. Eli Burton of My Tesla Adventure is going to join me here for his weekly segment, Supercharged with Eli Burton, and make me understand how is it possible we're still blaming the Autopilot. Don't get me wrong, I'm not a fan of Autopilot as a technology or the name, but I'm definitely here on Tesla's side. But let's talk about it. Of course, check out some other amazing contributors to my channel that include Sandy Monroe, Rich Rebuilds, and the CEO of Faraday Future, Karsten Breitfeld. So if you haven't subscribed to this channel, don't forget to subscribe, because all of these amazing people are contributing to this channel on a regular basis, and I cannot be happier that I can bring all of this to you guys. But today, let's talk about this. And of course, you know my opinion about Autopilot, but at the same time, I want to be fair, and I really do believe that this investigation, it's never bad to investigate when something goes wrong with a new technology, but only if the findings is actually going to help make the technology better and make people safer, rather than the other way around. And I have a feeling that's what's happening now. So all right, let's bring in Eli so he can explain this to me. But before that, of course, a quick reminder that this video and this channel is sponsored by Byton. Check out their all-electric SUV called Ambite, coming to the United States, coming to Europe. Absolutely no money down to reserve one. It takes about a minute of your time. You can use a link in the description of this video and join myself and tens of thousands of other people who reserved that car already. I cannot wait to see it in my driveway next year. All right. Eli, welcome back to the show, but let's start from the beginning. Give us a little bit of a background on what happened a couple of years ago, and what did investigation come up with?
So let's go back to 2018 when this crash occurred. I remember reading the headlines the day it happened, seeing this Model X split in half on one of the freeways in the Bay Area. And basically what happened is Model X with a engineer from Apple in the driver's seat drove his car directly into this median divide, and he died in the crash. The initial results reported that Autopilot was active during the crash. So as you can imagine, a lot of you guys remember, the headlines basically read, Autopilot in Tesla Model X kills driver.
Yeah, and so me and you have driven past that point. This is where 85 forks out of 101 on Mountain View. At that time, I had a 1.0 Autopilot, and it was fine. Obviously, different times of day, sun positioning and junk on the freeway and so forth. But all right, so now he was an Apple engineer who was using his Apple iPhone to play a game, as it turns out, as he was driving and engaged in Autopilot. He crashed because the Autopilot misunderstood the lines that weren't maybe visible to the camera, or at that time the Autopilot was as advanced. He crashed. 2 more cars crashed into them, but there was another caveat that could have saved his life.
Yeah, so one of the things that the NTSB found in their investigation was that there's like this guardrail type of thing that's supposed to exist right before this hard cement wall. And it had been damaged 11 days previously in an accident involving a Prius hitting this divide. And they said that the CHP didn't report the damage, and as a result, the barrier wasn't in place that should have been. And they said they believe that even with the head-on crash into this, had the barrier been in place that should have been, they don't believe the driver would have died.
Right, and a lot of times they don't replace the barrier right away, right? They usually put those yellow buckets with water. That would be also very much a preventative measure. But nevertheless, unfortunately, he died of his injuries. Okay, now at that time, Tesla released the log files and kind of their findings about what happened, and NTSB wasn't very happy with them, and they ended up kicking them off of the investigation, and Elon ended up hanging up on their, the guy in charge, the director of the and no, do you think at that time Tesla should have done it? Because NTSB said, listen, you're interfering with our investigation. You released the data that wasn't full picture. It's kind of damaging for the public safety. Elon disagreed. Where do you stand on that?
I think Tesla absolutely did the right thing, because here's why. Crash happens. The media is swarming on Tesla, attacking the credibility of the brand, causing people to distrust the feature before, I mean, the rush to judgment, the court of public opinion is real. And the only data that Tesla released was that the auto driver did have autopilot inactive, that their system indicated that the driver did not have his hands on the wheel for 6 minutes prior to the accident. And Tesla also indicated how many times the driver had been notified, warned on his drive about not having his hands on the wheel. And it had done that to him repeatedly. So I think that release was absolutely fair considering the coverage that was going on around the incident. And it's not like these investigations are quick. It's not like Tesla could have sat back, hey, the investigation data is going to be out a week later. We can wait till then and recapture the damage being done to our brand. The investigation took over a year. This accident happened in 2018. We're in February of 2020 by the time the data is released. So all the damage that's going to be done to the brand from the accident happening or the investigation even happening is immediately. So if a brand waits 2 years to say, oh, hey, we weren't guilty, doesn't matter. The damage was already done. So for them to put out and say, hey, our system did warn this guy and he didn't have his hands on the wheel in the accident, which was factually proven to be correct, by the way, by NTSB's investigation, I think it was completely legitimate. Now, had the data Tesla released been wrong, came out in the investigation to be wrong, then I'd say no, Tesla made a huge mistake. But they released data that they believed to be accurate and it was proved to be by the NTSB.
Now, I remember doing the story in this. Even at that time, I was kind of 50-50 because on one hand, listen, there is a procedure how NTSB works with automakers to figure out what caused the accident and how to improve it, right? So when somebody kind of breaks those internal rules, obviously they have a right to be unhappy. Now, I think
they do, and they totally had the right to kick Tesla out of the investigation. I don't think that was an unfair response by NTSB.
Right. It wasn't unfair, but it was still, if we're talking about, everyone's saying, both sides are saying public safety, but honestly, you want the manufacturer to be involved, right? So kicking them out of the investigation actually probably was not a benefit to the public safety because you want every party to be involved and especially with Tesla having all of these logs and being able to kind of, recreate what really happened there. I thought it was wrong on NTSB's side because, but at the same time, okay, let's move on from there, right? It was a mess of, in the beginning. All right, now their findings now, they figured it out. Who are they blaming? We'll start with Autopilot. Tell us why.
This is it. So the totality of this blame is wild. So they start with Autopilot and they criticize Autopilot for not doing enough to prevent drivers from misusing it. In fact, one of the statements from the administrator is that investigation showed Autopilot was engaged in like 19 minutes before the accident and had his hands off the wheel for the last 6 seconds. One of the things that they claimed as well, that they need to make sure that car makers are putting in redundancies in place so that drivers are not treating these partially autonomous systems as fully autonomous cars because, quote unquote, they don't have driverless cars.
All right, so now there's a little bit more to this story because, first of all, this gentleman who unfortunately died, he has complained to, I believe, to his friends and family that he noticed that Autopilot, was making some mistakes before. So he was kind of annoyed with an Autopilot. So you kind of, besides the warning that
he knew it wasn't a fully autonomous car. Right? Like very clearly, even by conversations he had with his family. And I would say too that there's been surveys that have been done on this topic with the public. And the media does this is tries to attack the name Autopilot. And I love it because like they'll do a survey and be like, how many people think Autopilot is an autonomous car? And they'll ask the average public, by the way, not a Tesla owner. And the percentage is very high for people who think it's a self-driving car. But what the public thinks about the feature has no relevance on safety. What matters is what do people who own the vehicles that have the feature believe in its capability? And I know a ton of Tesla owners, and I've yet to meet one who believes they have a truly self-driving car that they can take their hands off the wheel, not pay attention, and take a nap.
Well, so this is where we disagree, right? Because first of all, it's not just about the drivers, it's about the public perception, right? Because the problem with these stories is that, the public perception is what most people believe Autopilot is when a car drives itself, right? And as I remember when I had a 1.0 Autopilot, and, just to kind of promote the technology and promote the car, I said, yeah, it drives itself on the freeway, right? Like but because it kind of did even a 1.0. But the word Autopilot, to me and most people, despite the fact that there are warnings and everything, despite the fact that it comes from the, aviation, where autopilot is not a self-flying technology either, it still, to most of the people, including myself, before we all got involved, meant that it's a self-driving car. And, there's so many other words that could have been utilized here by Tesla, an assistant, driver assistant. I mean, there's so many other names that were already utilized by other manufacturers. I really do believe that, because Tesla knows and knew that overall people believe that autopilot is a self-driving technology, that was and still is misleading name for the technology.
I mean, if we're going to call that misleading, then the name autopilot that's been given to aircraft is misleading, because like a lot of people think that planes just fly themselves and pilots sit there. And a large portion of the time they do, which by the way is also the case. A large portion of the time I'm an autopilot AP 3.0 in my car. I'm sitting there with my hands on the wheel, and for 90% of my drive, I'm just there monitoring, which is the same thing that pilots do. And autopilot in planes has evolved over the year too. They've had multiple levels of autonomous flying as well. And what the public's perception is on that really doesn't matter, so long as the pilots in control of these cars or control of these planes handle them safely and get them on and off the ground and nobody gets hurt. And honestly, the same thing goes for these cars. Whether or not what people's perception of it only matters in the extent that what the people's perception of it are who operate these vehicles. Well, and I really see no difference from the people who operate these cars versus the people who operate these planes. Well, so long as they understand what the technology is capable of, what it can and can't do, I really don't have a problem with it. And let's keep in mind too, like I think on the early years of autopilot, it may have been a little bit early for a naming convention like that. But at the same time, what AP 1.0 had when that came out was nothing like any of the driver assist features that any other car ever had. And also keep in mind, Tesla's from the beginning has been on a path and a march to actual autonomy. And I think in the next year or so, we're going to actually see a car reach level 3 certification of autonomy, which at level 3 autonomy, that is, in certain circumstances, you will be given permission by the car to not monitor it, not have hands on the wheel, and not have to give input. So I don't think we're too far away from this autopilot actually hitting a point that in the right circumstances will meet the criteria for autonomy.
So here's where I disagree in terms of saying, well, autopilot is also not a self-flying feature for the pilots. The thing is, airline pilots get way more training, and the regulations and rules are way more strict than for driving a car. So there's no way a pilot of an airplane would not know what autopilot actually does. But
in part because airplanes are far more complicated, right? Far larger vehicles, they involve flight, and they're harder to get off the ground.
But mainly because, in order to fly one, you have to be very much trained. Now, when a Tesla sells a car, especially at the end of the quarter, remember where it was actually not even Tesla employees that were training people?
Which honestly, I think is the best scenario. Because do you know who can train people on how to use a car the best? People who own them, which is not Tesla employees, by the way.
Right, but when you're in a crunch and when you're relying on a volunteer, okay, who maybe came out not so much because they're knowledgeable but because they just wanted to be a part of it and just wanted to help Tesla, but really the knowledge is lacking. When you're being trained by a non-Tesla employee in a crunch, well, you probably have a chance of being misinformed of what autopilot does and doesn't do. And then you fall back on your default understanding of what it is, which is the self-driving, and that's where misleading information happens. And it doesn't take that many misinformed Tesla drivers to get in a situation like this.
Well, here's the thing, though. The guy in this accident was aware of its limitations and even complained about it. And here's the other thing, too. If there was a problem of Tesla drivers thinking that these cars were truly autonomous, we would be seeing the news headlines of guy falls asleep in car, crashes, and blames Tesla, saying he thought it was a full self-driving car. If that is not happening, if that were happening, then I'd be agreeing with you and saying, yeah, we've got a misinformed owner problem of people are turning on this feature, going to sleep and killing themselves or others or crashing their cars. We don't see those stories happen. And trust me, if they happened, it would be global news, because that's what happens anytime a Tesla crashes. So I'm not disagreeing with you that there may be some misinformation that occasionally happens. I guarantee that that's the case. But if it were resulting in accidents, guarantee the people who had that misunderstanding would be on television with their lawyers screaming at it and talking about how they're suing Tesla. And
Well,
that's not happening.
so okay, we can agree to disagree on it. I've always thought autopilot is just a incorrect name for what it is. But let's get back to this particular driver, because
Yes,
we do
back to the
know
investigation.
we do know that he knew that autopilot wasn't perfect, and it wasn't autopilot, the self-driving. He also kind of knew that playing a game on his phone and not paying attention can get him killed, right? And that's what essentially happened. So now Tesla is getting blamed for this crash because autopilot did make a mistake, right? It wasn't just autopilot screwed up. And it does happen once in a while, less and less now, but it did screw up. But NTSB
that wasn't the only person they blamed, right? So this is where it got pretty absurd for me. So they blamed Apple.
Right.
They put the three groups that they blamed, they kind of talked about this, is that Apple had an equal share of the blame for the problem. And in the statement that they made, it's totally salacious. And quote, this is a quote from Sumalt from the NTSB. Apple has yet to recognize their own responsibility as an employer. They failed to say their 150,000 employees that we care about you, that we don't want you to go out and kill yourself or others on the roadway. Apple has failed in that respect. So what they're saying is that because Apple has not gone so far to somehow make it impossible to use your phone in a moving vehicle, that Apple doesn't care about its employees and they don't care if they die.
Right. So this
has got to be the most salacious nonsense.
This is kind of weird, right? Because there are two ways how Apple can be looked at here. One, as an employer of this guy, which they have no control or responsibility of how he lives his life, but also as the maker of iPhone, because the guy was an iPhone, right? On another hand, it's a product that it's in the hands, literally in the hands of the consumers, and you can't blame the manufacturer for having somebody misuse it, especially when everybody knows that it's illegal to be on your phone while you're driving.
And there's a setting in the phone that you can have it so that the phone will disable itself when you're moving. But the problem is you can't just enforce that, because then passengers would never be able to use phones. And if I'm a passenger in a car and you're going to ban me from using my phone because the car's in motion, I'm buying another phone. So there's a limited amount that the phone makers can even do. There's no way for the phone to tell who's the driver and who's your 8 passengers. But it's crazy. It's not Apple or any phone maker's problem to prevent you from being stupid.
Right, exactly. It's not the responsibility of the maker of the product, because you can, for example, if I take this iPhone and throw it at the baby, right? You're gonna blame the iPhone, or you're gonna blame the idiot who did this, right?
The NTSB would say the iPhone should have had an anti-baby throwing.
Exactly. So I find that kind of ridiculous. Now they also blamed, and we'll get to the driver in a second, but they also blamed the NHTSA, because that's actually the administration that regulates the technology. They said that they're kind of sitting on their hands and not regulating how Tesla and other companies rolling out this technology. Now, is there some truth to that this technology should be regulated a little bit more?
Well, this is where things get juicy. And NTSB is not a government agency with any authority. They are just an investigative agency. That's it. That's their entire existence, is to investigate and report. And just based on their comments that they made on Apple's culpability in this, they kind of go over the top in some of their dramatization and comments they make about responsibility in the report. And I think in part that's because that's it. All they've got is their words. And they really think they go way too far on this.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Sorry, but they're actually, my question was more about their blame.
I was about to jump over to that. So sorry. The NHTSA, the NHTSA, which is actually responsible for managing road safety, that's responsible for permitting, actually works with private industry to actually make the legislation. They actually deal with trying to find the balance between safety, business, private enterprise, and the economy. And there's a compromise that they make, versus NTSB cares about one thing and one thing only: safety to the absolute extreme. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's what that agency exists for. NHTSA actually has to take into the broader balance the greater common good. And that includes the businesses that are working on developing and rapidly improving these technologies. Now, I understand NTSB's complaints, but then I also look at the accident data, right? And we've seen Tesla accidents data. They're releasing them. every quarter. And by the data itself shows that when cars are using Tesla Autopilot engaged and Tesla's safety, accident avoidance features, the rate of accidents in Teslas is 6 times less than the average vehicle on the road. That falls to 4 times less for cars that aren't using autopilot but still have the enhanced safety features. And it falls to 3 times less for just Teslas without any of them. So on a base level, Tesla owners are about 3 times safer than the average car. They're 6 times safer when autopilot is involved. So if I'm NHTSA, I look at the data and be like, okay, look, I understand some concerns around these specific incidents, but the net benefit I'm seeing is the greater good is served by these features being allowed to operate on the road, even as they are right now, even knowing they need more improvements.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was on my phone, but I was paying attention. Okay, but listen, I get it. Listen, like for example, let's take the person falling asleep on autopilot, right? There were 2 or 3 instances when somebody caught somebody sleeping on autopilot, and obviously you should not sleep in your car while you're driving. I get it, but in that case, that every single one of them survived because on autopilot, that car will essentially stop, right? It's not going to continue going. It will slow down and stop. Or if you're driving any other car, it will probably and almost definitely crash and cause this person and many other people to get injured. So
I've had autopilot save me before. Driving back from the Bay Area on the road on 80 as you're going between like Vacaville and like the split to go where it goes to 50. That is a very straight, consistent, like just droning on near strip of road. And I fell asleep one night at 2:30 in the morning. And the reason I know is because I woke up to autopilot beeping at me to put my hands on the wheel. Yeah. I mean, I was exhausted. It's been a whole day out at an event in the Bay. And if it weren't for that happening, that feature existing, and then ultimately waking me up, I would have crashed into the side of the wall before I even knew what happened.
Yeah. Now, so let me tell you, like my opinion on that. I think there's some truth to NTSB calling out NHTSA on regulating this. For example, if I was to be honest here, I would prefer that NHTSA require Tesla to literally provide, I don't care if it's 20 or 30 minutes training for those people who activate autopilot. Even if it's like online traffic school, you know what I mean? Just where you watch this and what is that when I was young, we actually couldn't go to the traffic school online. We had to go and be there for like 8 hours, and they would show us this movie Red Asphalt, I think it's called. Yep, you know how Asphalt. You can really die. So show them something like this and make sure say, hey, listen, this autopilot thing is not a self-driving feature. Have them sign for it, right? Like make them type it in. Autopilot is not a self-driving technology. Signed, love, Alex. Okay, so like, I would require people to do that because they are giving these people who can barely drive, which I think we can all agree we're not very good drivers as humans. We're giving them yet another tool to screw up with. And I think I would require, at least at this point, some sort of a very, very strict notification before a person uses autopilot. Because I remember when they've initiated it, when I had my 1.0 autopilot, it was literally just kind of, you wake up, you go to your car, it has autopilot, boom, that's it. And that was 1.0. That was not as advanced. So I think that should have
does require a couple of confirmations. One when you activate enhanced autopilot, another one when you inactivate automatic lane change. There's several different another one when you activate full self-driving preview. So there's several different places now that you have to agree to their disclaimer before it lets you activate it. But again, it sounds like they probably didn't have that back in the 1.0 days. I mean, I'm jealous of the 1.0 days because in the 1.0 days, they didn't even have the nag warnings that they have now, which, by the way, I would say were necessary because people were misusing the feature. But I remember driving a 1.0 car, and you activate that thing, and for half an hour, it wouldn't matter where you put your hands.
Yep, I remember that.
I just want to highlight this, too, is like now that I actually have a car with autopilot is the first time in my life that I actually have to keep my hands on the wheel. Because you know how I drove before that when I just had a cruise control car? Like a lot of you guys did, too. I had my 2 knees on the wheel, and that's what I would use to keep my car going straight in the lane because that was more comfortable. And as soon as something would need to, I'd jump in and take control. Everyone was doing that without all these sensors, without all these cameras. Now that I actually have autopilot that requires me to give input, I'm probably driving safer now in a safer position now than I ever have in my entire life.
Absolutely. And but to me, I remember buying a car with an autopilot, and then like a few months later, they require us to keep my hands on the wheel, which to me, just me, Alex, completely wiped out the whole purpose of an autopilot. From then on, if I would have bought another Tesla after that, I would have not gotten an autopilot. To me, it's a completely useless feature, but it is very useful to other people. Like, I know you absolutely love it, and it obviously might have
But I
saved your
do,
life.
honestly, I do find the amount of notifications aggravating, but I understand why it's there and why they had to put it there. So I deal with it, but I can't wait for the day that that's not there anymore.
I absolutely agree. Okay, well, let's talk about the driver here. Again, it's very unfortunate that he has passed away. But at the same time, we cannot use that as an excuse not to talk about personal responsibility, right? So I know it's more of a philosophical question here. Listen, do you agree with me that if you are driving a car, and whether or not you have this technology, it doesn't excuse you from having a responsibility for your driving, especially if on top of using this technology and not paying attention, you're playing a game on your phone, which is also illegal and you shouldn't be doing. Do you agree that we should blame a person for causing an accident if those are the circumstances?
I think, unfortunately, this NTSB report is continuing to contribute to a cultural problem we have where nobody's to blame for anything. The one person they didn't blame was the guy who was looking at his phone instead of looking at the road. Like, why is the first person we blame is that the phone company that made the phone with the game, or the car company that made the driver assist feature designed to make things safer? Why do we blame all the technologies that made it a little bit easier for this guy to be illegal and do something that's irresponsible? He didn't have a choice to pick up that phone. Like, are phones and games so addicting and autopilot so unbelievably persuasive that he was mind controlled to take his hands off the road? Is that where we're at now? No, I think it's insane that this report didn't put the first front and center. It should have said the driver didn't have their eyes on the road. There was human error was the main contributing factor to this accident. Now let's talk about all the technologies that were involved that helped contribute to this crash. That's not the way it was laid out. It was taking shots at Apple for not locking this guy out of his phone, and Autopilot did miss the thing. And then the guardrail for not being better built out to prevent him from dying in the event he did hit it. All those were legitimate things, but it was like this guy had no culpability in his own death.
It does, and I think you nailed this nail on the head, because.
And by the way, my condolences go out to his family. This is nothing attack on him personally. I didn't know this guy, but his loss of life is very tragic, and unfortunately, it happens every day that people make simple choices that seem like they won't have consequences, and more often than not, they won't until the time that they do. So it is very sad that this man didn't pass, that he didn't make it, that the barriers weren't in place. Like, it didn't have to end this way, and it's very tragic. So I want to separate this person from my response to the investigation.
In just in case if somebody who's watching didn't understand, we are separating this as a use case to learn and really start it, because it does come to a personal responsibility, right? And I absolutely agree. Somehow we end up not blaming people, we're blaming everybody else around them, technology companies, and regulations, so forth, and except for them. Now, but let me play devil's advocate here. As a matter of fact, let me just be maybe a little bit of a hypocrite here. But if I would blame one agency, I don't know if you can guess it, that I would blame a DMV. It is way too easy to get a driver license and renew it. Like, I remember I got my driver license at I was 15 and a half, and not a single, and I'm 43 now, right? Not a single time anybody showed up at my house and say, "Hey, Alex, how's your driving? How's your mental health? You have anger issues? How's your vision?" You know what I mean? Like, none of that. And every time somebody gets in an accident, it just it's not that big of a deal, right? We should treat this way more seriously. People who are licensed to operate killing machines should be retrained, and everybody should retake classes, and those licenses should actually mean something. So in this case, if this guy got so comfortable that, and as a lot of people do, playing a game while driving a car, we have an agency that regulates that. And I think that's where I would probably put the most resources in terms of updating how our DMV operates, and a driver license is still a privilege and not a right.
My guess is that the automotive industry has had enough influence over government to affect the way DMV operates, because what does automotive industry want? As many vehicles on the road as possible. Honestly, I think there should be way stricter standards. I think there should be limits on the number of at-fault accidents somebody can get within 10 years and still keep their license. I'm totally with you, man. There's a small percentage of people who are far more dangerous than everybody else, and they should be very much targeted for retraining. And ultimately, if they don't get it together, they shouldn't be allowed to operate these things. But unfortunately, that's not the way licensing works at all. It's pretty much a damn rubber stamp unless you get multiple DUIs. Like, you have to really mess up to lose your license. And aside from drunk driving, there's not too many things I know of that are going to get it taken away. Now, I think, unfortunately and or thankfully, the rise of autonomous vehicles will ultimately solve this problem for us, because I think it would be a long time coming for DMV to ever get involved in the solution, because they never catch the public blame when somebody dies, right? It's never, why did this guy allowed to have a license? I mean, heck, man, we live in California. There's so many uninsured motorists. There's people who don't even have a license that when they get stopped by police, nothing happens. They don't even get a slap on the wrist. They get to keep driving away. Like, we don't actually, our government doesn't actually care that much about solving road safety from that direction. So thank goodness autonomous vehicles are going to ultimately solve it for them.
All right. Well, we're getting into so many topics, so I'm sure we can keep going and on and on. But let's talk about a couple of other things that I wanted to talk about. And one, let's talk about these babies right here. But also, I'm really excited that you are getting back to YouTubing. So tell us about both.
Yeah, so I'm now content creating full time, putting out about a video a week roughly on the My Tesla Adventure channel. You can find me at youtube.com/myteslaadventure. And the entire focus I'm giving on my videos is to bring value to the existing Tesla owners, to the Tesla community. That also is going to happen to, more often than not, be useful information for somebody who's looking at buying a Tesla. So video I have coming out this week is going to be diving into what it's like supercharging with the Model S. Do a comparison of a V2 versus a V3 supercharger, which I think you Model S owners are going to find very interesting. I hope I don't get too much hate for this one, but I only report things as they come out, regardless of whether it's good or bad.
Eli, let me interrupt you. Right? Did I just call it Elon? Yeah. Every time I want to argue with someone, I say Elon. No, but listen, there's no such thing as hate on YouTube. I think you're very much misunderstanding what it is. It's nothing but love in comment section, especially when you talk about Tesla. But go on.
Awesome. So yeah, I'm putting out a lot more videos on my YouTube channel, My Tesla Adventure. And then I've got a new project that I'll be releasing in a couple weeks. So I'll let you guys know once that comes. But the whole plan of this initiative is to kind of do news around and coverage and entertaining videos about things and progressions and news going around the space industry and outer space in general, but not done in a way that's overly nerdy and geeky and that only existing scientists would be interested in watching. Things that like you and me would actually be entertained by, even if we weren't necessarily trying to learn something. So that's a project I'm working on. Start making videos on that here in a couple weeks.
All right, man. I'm looking forward to it. I know we will continue this conversation, for probably a few more years at the very least. So thanks for hanging out here. I know it's a bit of a long video, but I think it was worth it. I think last time we did this, people did mine. So I appreciate you being on my channel, and I will see you next week.
Love being on here, man, and I can't wait to interact with all of you in Alex's comment sections.
We'll see about that. But yeah, so now don't forget I'm excited about Eli getting back to YouTubing. As a matter of fact, the other day I saw a video pop up saying, oh, he released a video. I was like, what is it? And it said, well, Tesla's Model S is going to have 300 miles. I was like, okay, that's great. And then a few hours later, I see Elon Musk tweet the same thing. And my reply was like, hey, you should really subscribe to Eli Burton channel, because we already knew that. So I love, as a matter of fact, that's how me and Eli met. I was trying to use his video of him capturing a semi-truck back in the day when it was really, really rare, and that's how we started interacting. So it definitely good old times. That's how we met. All right, well, I guess I'm cautiously optimistic to tell you guys that I'm looking forward to your comments, but there's so many topics, so I guess we'll have a few different conversations going. All right, thanks so much for joining me, and Eli, looking forward to your comments. Other than that, see you next time, and remember to stay charged.